Welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, the podcast where we dive deep into the art of overcoming. Here we share powerful stories that ignite healing and inspire profound transformations in your own journey. I'm Toby Dorr, and together we'll explore the resilience, courage, and fierce determination that turn life's challenges into stepping stones for growth. Let's begin this transformative journey together. Hi, and welcome back to Fierce Conversations with Toby. Today, my guest is Priscilla Coleman Jenkins. And Priscilla has an amazing story about her husband's journey, Dr. James Napoleon Jenkins Jr. And this is actually a book that she wrote about his life. And he just has an amazing story of going from a really troubled youth through drug addiction and in through the prison system, and then he ended up becoming a preacher. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's awesome. So we're going to have a really interesting conversation about that journey. Before we get started, I like to ask everyone what your favorite color is, and what do you think that color says about you?
Well, my favorite color is sort of a peach color.
Hmm.
It's sort of I like that color because it's kind of bright, and people say that's my undertones of my skin. When I
Uh-huh.
wear it, it shows up. And it was a period of time in my life where I wore a lot of black because of my past and things and so forth. So that color sort of brightens me up just to think about.
Yeah, I love that. I like it when people have a really specific color. It's not just blue or red. It's peacock or teal or peach. So I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
I love that. So what's the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
Okay, first I want to thank you for having me here today. So
Oh,
honored to
you're
be here. Thank
welcome.
you.
I'm
Um,
delighted to have you. We met at a book fair. So a few weekends ago, one of my girlfriends here sent me a Facebook message and said, Toby, there's a book fair in Kensington, Maryland, and I know you love them. And so I went to the book fair and I talked to you at your booth, and you were telling me about your husband and your journey. And I said, hey, let's get you on the podcast. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for
yeah. And thank you for asking.
coming.
The hardest thing in my life was before I met James Jenkins. I was married early 24 years old. I was married for 25 years, and I'd grown up in a really abusive childhood and so forth. So around age 50, I got out of the marriage. It's a very turbulent marriage. And so the hardest thing was once I left, I realized how much my life had been controlled by the abuser of my childhood and social isolation, and then marrying a person who had a lot of issues. For the first time in my life, I'm all alone. I never lived on my own before, 50 years old almost, and had to think about what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to recover from all of this? I had a lot of severe depression and PTSD, and just trying to figure out what to do. Um, that was the hardest time. And I was seeing a therapist, and she said to me, you're a Christian, and I'm a Buddhist, and I believe all the things I say, they help me recover, but you don't seem like you're internalizing what you
Uh-huh.
say, what you believe. And so I really started that journey of just really sitting with the word and just taking one verse and memorizing when I felt suicidal. Okay, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about this. And started really, the Bible talks about renewing your mind to the point of it taking hold inside my mind and me just meditating that. So just realizing at 50, I had never lived on my own, never lived in an apartment before on my own, and just starting over was just so hard and just didn't know where to start. So that was the part.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was married to my first husband for 28 years and left when I was 48. And of course, my leaving was pretty dramatic because I had started a prison dog program and fell in love with one of my dog handlers and helped him escape from prison. So
Wow.
that was quite dramatic, quite a dramatic exit. But I can relate. It's still kind of, starting over at midlife when you're supposed to be slowing down and reaping the relaxation of all the work you've done up till then. So that is hard. So tell us about meeting James.
Well, after I started getting myself together and I realized I liked singing and I realized that, I could start helping people. So I started going to nursing homes, singing, and just going places to where people were hurting in their homes and just helping people. And I went back to my original home church and I met James Jenkins. I didn't know at that time when I left the church in my first marriage, there was no outreach ministry where there was a person in charge. So people said, "Hey, Priscilla Jenkins over here, and he's got outreach ministry and he goes to nursing homes." And we've been going, and nobody can sing. He's been asking, "Can somebody, if we could sing, we'd get people to come. Is anybody find a singer?" So he said, "Priscilla sings." So I went with them to the nursing home and started singing. And then he had his hands in everything, in street ministry, prisons, everything. So I just started getting involved with ministry with him. That's how I met him. Doing that, I said, "Wow, I don't have to go by myself to the nursing home. I can go to with this group and go with him to things." And I just saw his heart for people. He just
Mhm.
loved people so much. Everywhere we went on the street, he would stop to listen to people and to hear people. And I had the same kind of heart. So one Christmas, we were doing Angel Tree Christmas, which was under prison fellowship. And we were over in South and Northeast with a family. There was a lot of things going on in the neighborhood with, with the police. And I was sitting there, I was so, from my own childhood, it really hit me. I was sitting there, tears in my eyes, because it was so hard watching the young child with the mom in this situation. And then I looked over at him, he had tears in his eyes, and he said to me, "You have the same heart I have about these things. I've never met anybody like that." And that's
Wow.
how we met. And then I think a year later we started to date
Mhm.
and married later
Interesting.
on.
So James had a a really a miraculous story, I think, that from where he started out to where he ended up. So give us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, so I met him later in life, of course, when that was not part of his life, but he did grow up in Washington, D.C., like I did, but he's 10 years older than I am. And
Mhm.
so he got involved in crime early, just in a neighborhood, seeing a criminal, this guy he called Joe. Joe was the person who would come to the neighborhood and have money and have food and have things. And so he sort of, at 8 years old, he remembered, I put in his book, that he was 8 years old when the police came to arrest Joe. And James, my husband, went and got in the car. The police said, "What are you doing? Why are you get Joe is my hero. If you're gonna take him, you gotta take me too." So the police, of course, put him out the car and said, "What are you doing? Get out the car." And so
Yes, and then he ran into Joe later inside the prison.
yes, because he pretty short after those years, he started doing a lot of the things he saw Joe doing,
Mhm,
robbing and stealing, and got on heroin very early in life.
mhm,
He told me and I put it in his book, he didn't think he'd live to be 21 years old because of the
mm,
lifestyle he had. And
mhm,
then he did run into Joe in prison years later, and thought Joe would be glad to see, that he's the man on the street, because James became quite a criminal on the street. People
mhm,
told me that he was feared in parts of DC. He had
mhm.
his crew, and nobody bothered anybody that knew James at all. James
Yeah,
Jimmy's name is on the street. So Joe, he thought he'd be excited to see him. Joe turned and look away, like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe
mhm.
you followed in my footsteps."
Wow. Yeah, there really is in a lot of neighborhoods in our country, there is a lack of positive male role models, and you can't be surprised that boys grow up to follow what's in their neighborhood, and that's a sad problem, I think.
It really is, and I think that's why it was so important to James when he be started to get involved in ministry and helping people on the street, that he would go into these neighborhoods, into the Angel Tree, and then he started his own children's camp, where he
Oh,
in the Green Castle, Pennsylvania, for 3 days. I was under prison fellowship. Prison fellowship had Angel Tree Christmas, summer camp, and he formed his own camp called Camp Joy, and he found Camp Joel in Green Castle, Pennsylvania. And for 20 years, he took Angel Tree kids and disadvantaged kids in DC to camp for 3 days to see another world. So when he would go into these neighborhoods, he always made sure he was well dressed. He drove a very nice car that he enjoyed driving. And so he was a buffer against what
mhm,
they were seeing. And a lot of them didn't know, of course, because years had passed. If he did ministry for over 30 years, the people in the neighborhood, other than the older ones, didn't know him. But the younger ones were thinking, "Oh, here's this preacher," and they said, "No,
mhm,
that's James Jenkins. Do you know who James?" And so they were kind of it was a buffer against them saying, and so that was good for him because he was able to pull those kids into camp.
Mhm.
A lot of those kids grew up in camp and they became counselors and they became people who would go to the neighborhood and show a better way. Because, as you said, if you don't see anything else and you're a hungry kid in the streets
Right.
and you don't know another way, you go,
Mhm.
you gravitate to somebody that looks like they're doing well. And so James was a big buffer for that for several years, for about 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you met him and you 2 were married, did you become part of that ministry that of his as well?
Yes, actually, before we married, I got involved with the ministry at the church. He was associate pastor at the church for outreach. That was his title, and he
Mhm.
had quite a team. And so I became, before we married, the secretary. I worked as treasurer. Um, Actually, I went into women's prison. He went into the detention center in Maryland, and I went
Mhm.
into women's prison to talk with women there. He would have different parts of the United States where he did. I helped with that and with the camp and with everything he was doing. I was involved with. I became the person that was close to him in those last few years of his life that did those things. And we started our own church in 2021, Compassion of Christ Church, DC, where he came out of the original ministry. And then he always was networked with organizations and churches in the area. That was his big thing that he worked with CSOSA, the social services organizations, to have not just spiritual support, because he realized from his own journey that he needed that help. Because when he got out of prison, he had a 30-year sentence. He served 10 of those years. But
Mhm.
he was so notorious, he had to do 20 years on probation. And
Wow.
so, on those through those 20 years, he learned when he got out for 10 years, when he went in, there was no metro system, and his probation officer said, get on the subway and meet me. And he's thinking, well, what is a subway? And
Uh-huh.
so he realized people need to know. So he was big on working with returning citizens as a mentor. And then he even had a returning citizens brunch where he had all the social service organizations in one place. And I helped organize that, where there was a man that had been in for 40 years,
Wow.
came and just showing people how to. So I got involved with that. How to use what's a cell phone? How to use a cell phone?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know?
Uh-huh. I did 27 months in prison, and when I went to prison, there weren't cell phones. I mean, you could buy a phone to put in your car and plug it in, but it was like this big, you know?
Yes.
There was no smartphones. Oh, actually, we had cell phones, but we didn't have smartphones. And the smartphones came out while I was in prison. And I was a really technical person before I went in, and it was just blew my mind, all the things. Just in 27 months that changed. I can't
Wow.
imagine someone doing 10 years and not having the internet and then coming out and having internet and, all kinds of everything. It's just amazing.
Yeah, so I got involved with everything he did, and once I became secretary, we planned. I helped him with this plan. He had a team, though. He had a great team in
Mhm.
the original church. When we started our own church, we continued with the social service organizations, the smaller ministries that were doing outreach throughout the city and the Maryland and Virginia area. And so, yeah, I was really involved with him with that those last 7 years of his life.
Mhm. And is his work still continuing?
In parts of it, when we formed our own church, as I said, we networked with other ministries, and they were doing what they were doing.
Mhm.
The last 7 months of his life, he was quite ill. Uh,
Ah,
he had a prostate cancer diagnosis before we married, and he was in remission. Uh,
mhm.
and so, when he asked me to marry him, that's one thing he said. He said, "I don't know what's going to happen with my health.
Ah,
If you give me a chance, I'm going to just be the best husband I can be." And
mhm.
so the cancer returned, and those last 7 months we couldn't do too much. So, the Angel Tree part is the Camp Joel that we were involved with. They have their own standing organization, and so they're continuing.
Ah,
I'm
okay.
continuing as far as my own ministry through going into nursing homes and hospice.
Mhm.
Prisons, I have not gone back to do that. I reached out to several prisons. His book is available in prisons. I made that show it's available there. To returning citizens, I also made it available to them if they wanted it. But as far as the holistic part of what he was doing, he was quite an amazing man. He had his hands in so every part of outreach, even in Africa. He had
Wow.
every part. He just has such a big heart for people that
Mhm.
people always wondered how one person could do what he did, but he had such a great vision that, and he always said to me, I don't think I'll finish this vision in my lifetime. I don't know who will finish it. But that's why the book was so important to me to finish, to put
Yes.
everything in it.
You know, I think it's a tribute that you don't finish your vision and your mission in your lifetime, because if you have something that is so important and it continues on after you're gone, that's the real tribute.
Yes, it is. So what I did with the book, I compiled a lot of his notes and things I learned with him and did with him. And in the back of the book is the social organizations that he worked with, and
Mhm.
that's where it's being used with people who are probation officers or who are mentors. They're finding those resources because I tried to make the book be who he was, which was
Mhm.
not just helping people from his own being physically there, but what organizations, if somebody is homeless in their youth, if somebody is on drugs, where the rehabilitation centers, where is, and he was that, all of that. So his book
Mhm.
has all those resources in him in the back.
That's really important because you can't really start changing your life until you get yourself healed and whole. So it's great that you have those resources in the book so people know where to go.
Yes. Also, people who are interested in prison ministry. I came across a person.
Mhm.
I was at a conference. Person was from Texas, and he was interested in doing prison ministry. Also, have the organizations that train James, Prison Fellowship, and I think it's Caros, and some of the others where he sent volunteers to be trained because for him it was very important if you came to volunteer that you trained because you're on the street. A couple of times I was on the street with him doing outreach, giving out clothes and food and toiletries, and people who wanted to help were not trained. And if a person's having a mental breakdown, you have to know how to engage or not engage
Mhm.
to help the situation or make it worse. And so that was really important to him that he trained the volunteers. And so I was part of that process too.
That is really important. I love that. I love the work that he was doing. He sounds like an amazing man, and kudos to you for being by his side because I met my husband after I got out of prison, and I wasn't really interested in getting married again or having another relationship, but God kind of just put us together and made it clear to both of us that we weren't going anywhere, so we might as well get used to it. And Chris and I always say that in our life, in our marriage, one and one doesn't make two, it's more like 11 because together we can do so much more than either one of us could do by ourselves and then combine into something. So there's a lot of power in a really strong partnership.
Yeah, I agree. Same thing with James and myself. I was, as I said, I got involved because I was doing it alone. And
Mhm.
then he actually approached me. My first marriage was so turbulent. I wasn't looking for anyone. And
Mhm.
he approached me after one of the meetings and said, hey, I'd like to be your friend. And I said, I really have enough friends. I really, I was very resistant, and he just kept saying, he said, I have a book, of course, a little bit about my book, my story, and he said, I've read your book, and I see that you've had quite a rough time, and that's okay.
Mhm.
I just want to be your friend, and he
Yeah.
just hung on and just kept showing up, and
Mhm.
because I was showing up for events. And then he would always try to say, "Oh, let's take the whole group to dinner. Can you go, Priscilla, with us to dinner?" And sometimes I
Uh,
wouldn't go, and other times I would go. And
mhm.
I think I had an event I had to go to for my job, and I asked some of the ladies to accompany me, and nobody answered my text. Normally, everybody's very responsive. Finally, I get a phone call from him, and he says, "Is it too late? I like to take you." And
Uh,
and I said, oh, I don't know. So I found out later all the ladies conspired that nobody would respond, and they called him at work and said, "Here's your chance."
because they all saw what needed to happen, and even though you couldn't see it yet.
Yeah, I couldn't, and so
Yeah.
they made that happen. So we went out that week, and then our first date was on Valentine's Day in 2018.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned that you have a book too. What's the title of your book?
My book is An Overcomer's Journey, from the Effects of Abuse through Scriptural Prayers, and that book was written in 2015. That book was birthed out of, like I said, when I learned that I could just sit and hold the scripture in my mind and we say it over and over, and I'm not going to kill myself today. The Lord is my shepherd. What is a shepherd?
Mhm.
He's going to take care of me. I don't have to do this. I'll be okay. And so that book was birthed out of those years from that first marriage. It talks about the abuse from my childhood, social
Mhm.
isolation, some of the marriage. I have scriptures in there. That journey. And that's the book that he read before he met me.
Mhm.
Um, and he said, I've been buying your book and giving it to people in ministry.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that's how my really first introduction to him after I started doing stuff in the streets.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so that book has been pretty good. It's in prisons, in the women's prisons. It's in West Virginia, California. It's been used in women's groups. It's been used
Mhm.
places like in Germany and Japan. People just pick it up online. I didn't originally. I was just going to put the scriptures together because I thought that was what was the link. But then I
Mhm.
realized if I didn't tell my story, people wouldn't know how I know what I know.
That's true. I think people really wanna know the journey that you took. I found in my own story, people wanna know how I got through it and how I came out okay, because then they can believe that they can do it too,
That's so
and
true.
it's a powerful testimony. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I did, and then I spoke with their my children's father was still alive at the time. He's in the book. I don't use names. I use something else
Mhm.
for the names, and they both said to me, "You've been through a lot, Mom. You need to tell it and
Mhm.
get it together." So that's what I did. That was 2015, and that's why my own personal ministry is called Overcomer's Journey through Scriptural Prayers, and
I
I have a
love that.
YouTube channel.
That's a
Yeah,
powerful title.
that's
Mhm.
where I've been, and yeah, so that's and so his book is I'm sort of married them both together because we both have had quite a journey.
Right. So his book's called Compassionate Outreach: A Journey from Crime to Ministry, and
That's
yours
correct.
is An Overcomer's Journey. So they're both journeys. That's beautiful. And we will include links to both of those books on in the show notes, so
Oh,
you'll be able to know where to go to get one.
thank you.
So, is there one question you wish that I'd asked and I didn't? Is there something else you'd like to share that we haven't touched on?
Let's see. It's a good question. I gotta get that. I think you covered everything. I just might explore a little more, say a little more about just the journey of sharing, as you said, your own story with other
Mhm,
people. Um, I didn't know the importance of that. I struggled and I didn't understand that people they might not have had my same story, but whatever their challenges are, as you said so beautifully, they know they can make it as well.
mhm.
I'm a retired music teacher and never had any attention to write. I'm a singer and a composer,
Wow. Mhm.
and that first book got pushed into me when I was on a Amtrak taking a trip, and a lady was saying to me, "You need to." She was saying something about something very similar to me, and I hadn't written the book, and so I was putting little scriptures together. And I was going to the public library in DC. You used to could be able to take a book writing class and a book binding class, and they had the DC Press.
Wow.
2014. So I had that little book, and I was giving it to people, and I realized it was powerful when I gave that little DC Press book to a friend. That gave it to a friend who was dealing with cancer for the third time. I talk about forgiving a little in that book.
Mhm.
And she, by Christmas of that year, she emailed me and said, "My friend found a lot of peace before she died."
Wow.
And I realized this is bigger than me, and I can't stay in a closet with this. If I can help, my
Mm.
whole thing is if I can help one person.
Yeah. That I felt the same way when I wrote my memoir. People were saying, "Oh, are you gonna sell 1,000,000 copies?" I said, "I wanna sell a copy to the person who really needs to hear it. That's who I'm writing for." So, but the interesting thing is we have a lot of parallels in our stories. I had finished the first draft of my memoir and I thought, "Oh, my job's done." When I was in prison on suicide watch, I promised God that I would tell my story and to change the lives of women. And I said, "Oh, that's it. I'm done. I did it and I'm off the hook now." And I was on an Amtrak train coming home from Chicago to Kansas City, and I thought, "No, I'm not done. I need to write a workbook to help women who maybe don't know how to rebuild their lives to start, looking at some personal development." And so I created that whole workbook on an Amtrak train on my ride home. So
Wow.
fact, doesn't know that they are inspiring to authors. Maybe they should do
Very,
a commercial about that.
very true. And when this person said that about the book, I had the copy and I had the papers, and she said, "Well, how will I get it? I don't even live in the area." And
Oh,
I didn't even know about Amazon or how to do whatever, or just in the dark, just kind of just praying my way as I go, figuring out what to do and how to do it. And that's how it ended up on Amazon and Kindle versions and that kind of thing to make it available.
yeah, that's interesting. That's really inspirational.
Yeah.
So, is there a question that you'd like to ask me?
Yes. How did you get started doing the podcast to really help get the word out here like this?
I never really intended to do a podcast, but I wrote my memoir and then I published a book of poems that came from my prison journals. And I created the series of 3 workbooks, and I always felt there's more. I need to reach more people. And my publisher said to me one day, she said, "Toby, you need a podcast. You need to do a podcast." And I said, "Okay, I'll do a podcast." And within a week or 2, I had decided on a name and done the graphics and started lining up my, guests, and I really love it. I find so many people with the best stories like you that I wouldn't have never found, because I would have never found you if I hadn't gone to the book fair and struck up a conversation, and I just love bringing those stories out into the world because I believe everyone has a story, and there's someone in the world waiting to hear that person's particular story.
That's powerful.
So, yeah, I just love it. So it's just another way for me to reach more people, and I've had a great time with it. So I release my podcast both as a YouTube video and as a traditional podcast on all the podcast platforms, and that way I can reach a totally different audience because I found that the people who watch the videos don't listen to podcasts, and the people who listen to podcasts really don't care much about videos. So, you just get a lot bigger audience that way.
It's really great. That's wonderful. You're doing great work, and I
Thank
appreciate.
you.
I was so honored that you asked me and that I got an opportunity to share,
Well,
especially James' story. He's such a
yeah,
wonderful man. I don't want him to be forgotten.
no, and I can see you're doing a good job at not letting him be forgotten. That's powerful. That's the most any of us can hope for, that someone carries on our name after we're gone
Yes, yes,
because
very
we
true.
made that much of an impact. So that's a great tribute. So, what's one word that inspires you?
Say it again.
What's one word that inspires you?
Mm, one word. Light.
Lights?
The word light. Light.
Yes, light. That's a powerful one. No one's ever said light before.
Yes, light for me because as growing up as a child, being isolated and locked in rooms, and we weren't allowed to have the windows open or go out and play or
Mm.
do anything. And just now, so the word light is to me means hope,
Yes.
means moving somewhere. There's a verse, Proverbs 4:18, that says, "The path of the just is as a shining light. It
Ah,
shines more and more until the perfect day." And
I
that's really
love
what my life was like. So when I left that marriage and at age 50, I had felt like I was living in a tunnel, had lived in a tunnel my whole life, and just started seeing bits of light.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. My favorite scripture and the one that really got me through prison was the still small voice. God wasn't in the fire. He wasn't in all this grandness. He wasn't in the trumpets. He wasn't where everybody expected him. But to find him, you just had to be still and listen. And so that's what's really at the core of my life, is just being aware of what's around me and listening.
That's powerful too, because a lot of times we do miss what's happening around us when we're so busy and we
We
don't sit.
do. And if we spend all the time talking or being busy, we don't even pick up on what's happening.
That's very true. That's very good.
Yeah.
Stillness and light. So put those two together.
Yes, yes, I love it. That's just beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Priscilla, for being on. I've been delighted to have you, and I can't wait to get your episode out into the world.
Thank you. And how should I look for it? And so I'll know when to.
I will send you all that. So you'll know it'll be on my YouTube channel, which is called Fierce Conversations with Toby. And
Yeah.
the podcast will be available on all the podcast apps, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you prefer. And they'll also all be on my website. Thank you for tuning in to Fierce Conversations with Toby. Your support means the world, and I hope today's episode made a positive impact on you. To keep our conversations going, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. A 5-star rating, like, comment, or review helps tremendously in spreading our message. You can also support the show by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/fierce conversations. All members receive a downloadable gratitude journal and access to a private Facebook group. Plus, 10% of your subscription goes directly to donating my workbooks to women in prison. Finally, sharing this episode with your friends and family is a great way to amplify our mission. Fierce Conversations is created and hosted by me, Toby Dorr, with production by Number 3 Productions. The theme music, Grooving, composed by Lisa Plass, features Lisa on flute, Carolyn Parody on piano, and Tony Ventura on bass. Learn more at tobydor.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, escape your prison.